She was only 9 years old when she entered that snowy cottage on Christmas Eve, orphaned and alone, but what she discovered in the locked chest hidden beneath the floorboards would reveal a $295 million secret that had been waiting 30 years for the right child to find it. Before we explore the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The town of Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, where Christmas lights went up the day after Thanksgiving, and where the smell of pine and cinnamon seemed to drift through every street come December. It was small, quiet, and safe. The kind of town where children still played outside until the streetlights came on, where neighbors borrowed sugar and actually returned it, where life moved at a pace that allowed you to breathe. For 9-year-old Emma, it was the only world she'd ever known, and it was perfect. Emma lived in a pale yellow house on Maple Street with her parents David and Sarah. The house had a front porch with a swing that creaked in the summer breeze, a backyard with a tire swing her father had hung when she was 5, and a kitchen that always smelled like her mother's cooking. Fresh bread on Sundays, chocolate chip cookies on Wednesdays, hot cocoa with marshmallows every single night in December. Emma's father worked at the town's small engineering firm, designing parts for machinery she didn't quite understand. Her mother taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary, the same school Emma attended. Everyone loved Mrs. Sarah. She had a way of making every child feel seen, heard, and special. Emma was proud to be her daughter. Their lives followed a rhythm that felt eternal. Breakfast together at the kitchen table, walks to school holding hands, bedtime stories read in soft lamplight, her father's terrible jokes that made her mother roll her eyes and Emma giggle uncontrollably. Sunday mornings at the community church, then lunch at the diner on Main Street, where Emma always ordered the same thing: grilled cheese and tomato soup. It was simple, it was ordinary, and to Emma, it was everything. December had always been Emma's favorite month. The whole town transformed into something magical. Garlands wrapped around street lamps, shop windows painted with snowflakes and reindeer. The massive tree in the town square lit up with hundreds of twinkling lights. But the best part was the traditions her family kept. Every year on the first Saturday of December, they'd drive out to Henderson's tree farm and cut down their Christmas tree together. Emma would run between the rows of pines and spruces, her breath making little clouds in the cold air until she found the one. Her father would saw it down while her mother took pictures. They'd tie it to the roof of their old station wagon and drive home singing carols off-key. This year had been no different. On December 3rd, they'd found a beautiful Douglas fir, full and fragrant. Emma had declared it the most perfect tree in the history of trees. They'd spent that evening decorating it together. Her father lifted Emma onto his shoulders so she could place the angel on top, a delicate porcelain figure that had belonged to her grandmother. Her mother made hot cocoa and played Christmas music on the old record player. They hung ornaments, each one holding a memory. The wooden reindeer Emma made in kindergarten, the glass snowflake from their trip to the mountains, the photo frame ornament with a picture of the 3 of them from last Christmas, all wearing matching red sweaters and goofy grins. That night, tucked into bed with her favorite stuffed rabbit, Emma had whispered to her mother, "This is going to be the best Christmas ever." Her mother had kissed her forehead and smiled. "Every Christmas with you is the best one, sweetheart." Emma had no way of knowing those would be some of the last words her mother would ever say to her. It happened on December 4th, a Tuesday. The kind of grey, cold day where the sky looked heavy with snow that wouldn't fall. Emma's parents had dropped her off at school that morning, just like always. Her father had ruffled her hair. Her mother had reminded her about her spelling test. Emma had waved goodbye and run inside to meet her best friend Lucy by the lockers. It was a normal day. Math class, recess, library time, lunch in the cafeteria where Emma traded her apple slices for Lucy's crackers like she did every week. She was in art class, painting a winter landscape with too much blue and not enough white, when the principal, Mr. Dawson, appeared in the doorway. He spoke quietly to her teacher, Mrs. Brennan, and both of them looked at Emma with expressions she couldn't read. Sad, careful, scared. "Emma," Mrs. Brennan said softly, kneeling beside her desk. Mr. Dawson needs you to come with him, sweetheart. Emma set down her paintbrush, her heart suddenly beating faster. Am I in trouble? No, honey, not at all. She followed Mr. Dawson down the hallway, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. The school felt too quiet. When they reached his office, there were 2 police officers waiting, a man and a woman. The woman had kind eyes, but they were glassy, like she'd been crying or was trying not to. Emma stopped in the doorway. Everything inside her went cold. Emma, Mr. Dawson said gently, guiding her to a chair, these officers need to talk to you about your mum and dad. The woman officer knelt down in front of her. Hi, Emma. My name is Officer Chen. I need you to be very brave right now, okay? Emma nodded, but she couldn't feel her hands. There was an accident this morning, Officer Chen continued, her voice trembling just slightly. A car accident on Route 9. Your parents were on their way to work when another vehicle crossed the center line. They were hit. Emma stared at her. The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds. Are they okay? She asked, her voice small and far away. Officer Chen's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. They didn't make it. They died at the scene. The room tilted. Emma heard a sound like rushing water in her ears. She looked at Mr. Dawson, then at the male officer, then back to Officer Chen, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was a mistake, to tell her this was some kind of horrible joke, but no one laughed. No one said anything, and in that silence, Emma's entire world shattered into 1,000 pieces she would never be able to put back together. The days that followed were a blur. Emma remembered fragments, but none of it felt real. She remembered being taken to the police station, then to a building with white walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed too loud. She remembered a woman with a clipboard asking her questions. Did she have grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone who could take care of her? Emma had shaken her head. Her father's parents had passed away before she was born. Her mother's mother lived in a nursing home with advanced dementia and didn't even remember her own name anymore. There were no siblings, no cousins nearby. Her parents had been only children, just like her. It was always just the 3 of them. And now it was just her. She remembered the funeral, though she wished she didn't. The church packed with people from town, all of them crying, all of them looking at her with pity that made her skin crawl. 2 caskets at the front, closed, covered in flowers. Emma had worn a black dress someone had bought for her because she didn't own one. She sat in the front row between a social worker and a woman from her mother's school. She didn't cry. She couldn't. It felt like if she started, she'd never stop. After the funeral, she was taken to a temporary foster home. The Caldwell family. They were nice enough. Mrs. Caldwell made spaghetti for dinner and set up a small bed for Emma in their daughter's room. But it wasn't home. Nothing smelled right. Nothing sounded right. Emma lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, clutching her stuffed rabbit, whispering to her parents in the dark. Please come back, she said. Please. I'll be good. I promise I'll be so good. Just please come back. But they didn't. The next morning, a different social worker came to pick her up. Her name was Patricia Moreno, a woman in her early 40s with dark curly hair pulled into a practical ponytail and eyes that looked tired but warm. She wore a heavy winter coat and carried a worn leather bag stuffed with files. Hi, Emma, she said gently, kneeling down to the girl's level. My name is Miss Patricia. I'm going to be helping you for a while, okay? Emma nodded but didn't speak. Patricia drove her to the county office, a grey building that smelled like old coffee and cleaning solution. They sat in a small room with a table and 2 chairs. Patricia pulled out a file and opened it carefully. Emma, I know this is really, really hard, she began, and I wish I could make it easier, but we need to find you a place to stay, a real home. I've been calling every foster family in the county, but it's December 23rd. Most families are full, or they're traveling for the holidays, or they're just not equipped to take in a child right now, especially on such short notice. Emma stared at her hands. Can I go back to my house? Patricia's expression softened with heartbreak. Sweetheart, the house is being handled by the estate. There are lawyers and paperwork and grown-up things that take time. You can't stay there alone." "I don't want to be alone," Emma whispered. "I know, and you won't be, I promise." Patricia reached across the table and squeezed Emma's hand. "We're going to figure this out." But figuring it out proved harder than Patricia expected. She made call after call. Foster homes were at capacity. Emergency placements were unavailable. Group homes were full. The holiday season had stretched resources thin, and a traumatized 9-year-old girl with no family was a case no one seemed ready to take on right before Christmas. By the afternoon of December 23rd, Patricia was running out of options. She sat at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, listening to yet another apologetic social worker explain why they couldn't help. When she hung up, she let out a long, exhausted breath and looked over at Emma, who was sitting quietly in a chair by the window, staring out at the grey sky. Patricia's heart ached. This child had lost everything: her parents, her home, her sense of safety. And now, on the eve of Christmas Eve, Patricia couldn't even give her a warm bed and a kind family. She scrolled through her database one more time, looking for anything she might have missed. That's when she saw it, a listing she'd never noticed before, buried at the bottom of the emergency housing file. It was a cottage on the outskirts of Millbrook, listed under county emergency services. The notes were sparse. Owned by estate, maintained by county, approved for temporary emergency placement, utilities active, furnishings intact. Patricia frowned. She'd worked in this county for 12 years and had never heard of this place. She clicked on the file. The address was 15 Winterbrook Lane. The property had been deeded to the county in 2010 after the owner, a woman named Eleanor Ashford, had passed away with no living heirs. According to the notes, the estate had stipulated that the cottage remain maintained and be used only for emergency housing for children in need. Patricia's pulse quickened. She grabbed her coat. "Emma," she said gently, "come on, sweetheart. I think I found something." The drive out to Winterbrook Lane took 20 minutes. The sky had darkened with the promise of snow, and the temperature had dropped sharply. Patricia's car heater rattled and wheezed, barely keeping the chill at bay. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her stuffed rabbit on her lap, staring out the window at the passing trees. They turned off the main road onto a narrow, unpaved lane that wound through a dense thicket of pines. Snow had begun to fall, light flakes drifting down like ash. The car's tires crunched over frozen gravel. They drove for what felt like miles, the trees pressing in on either side, until the lane opened into a small clearing. And there it was. The cottage sat at the edge of the clearing, nestled against a backdrop of snow-covered woods. It was small, made of grey stone with a steeply pitched roof and a single chimney. The windows were dark, but the structure looked solid, sturdy, untouched by time. A thin layer of snow dusted the roof and the front steps. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, beautiful but lonely. Patricia parked the car and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Is this it?" Emma asked quietly. Patricia checked the address on her phone. "Yeah, this is it." They stepped out into the cold. The air was sharp and still, broken only by the soft whisper of falling snow. Patricia pulled a key from her bag, the one the county office had given her, and walked up the stone path to the front door. Emma followed close behind, clutching her rabbit tighter. The door was heavy, painted a faded forest green. Patricia slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, almost too smoothly for a place that hadn't been opened in who knows how long. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing darkness. Patricia found a light switch just inside the doorway and flicked it on. A single overhead bulb flickered to life, casting pale yellow light across the interior. Emma stepped inside and stopped, her breath catching. The cottage was pristine, not abandoned, not forgotten, preserved. The front room was small but warmly furnished. A stone fireplace sat against one wall, the hearth swept clean. A sofa and 2 armchairs were covered with white sheets, their shapes ghostly beneath the fabric. A wooden coffee table sat in the center, its surface polished and dust-free. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with old hardcover books arranged by height. The floor was made of wide wooden planks, aged but beautiful, covered in places by woven rugs that looked handmade. Everything was still. Silent. Waiting. Patricia pulled back one of the sheets covering the sofa. Beneath it, the fabric was a deep burgundy, soft and undamaged. She ran her hand over it, frowning. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured. "This place has been empty for years, but it looks like someone just stepped out for the afternoon." Emma wandered deeper into the cottage. To the left was a small kitchen with a farmhouse sink, open wooden shelves, and a vintage stove that looked like it belonged in a museum, but gleamed as if it had been cleaned yesterday. To the right was a narrow hallway leading to what appeared to be 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. She walked down the hallway slowly, her footsteps echoing softly. The first door she opened revealed a bathroom with white tile, a clawfoot tub, and a mirror that reflected her small, pale face back at her. The second door opened into a larger bedroom, clearly meant for an adult. The bed was neatly made with a patchwork quilt. A dresser stood against the wall. A rocking chair sat by the window. The third door at the end of the hallway was slightly smaller. Emma pushed it open. Her heart skipped. It was a child's room. A little girl's room. The walls were painted a soft lavender. A single bed sat against one wall, covered with a quilt stitched with flowers and butterflies. A wooden toy chest rested at the foot of the bed. A small desk sat beneath the window, a stack of blank paper and a jar of coloured pencils waiting on its surface. On the walls were framed pictures of meadows and forests, painted in soft watercolours, and on a shelf above the bed sat a row of dolls, their faces gentle and kind, their dresses faded but clean. It was like stepping into a time capsule, a room untouched by the passage of years, waiting for a child who had never come home. Emma stood in the doorway, unable to move. Something about this room felt both comforting and unbearably sad. "Emma?" Patricia appeared behind her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" Emma nodded slowly. "Whose room was this?" Patricia looked around, her expression troubled. "I don't know. The file didn't say much, just that the woman who owned this place wanted it kept for emergencies." "It feels like someone's supposed to be here," Emma whispered. Patricia squeezed her shoulder. "Well, tonight, that someone is you." They spent the next hour making the cottage livable. Patricia found linens in a hallway closet, all carefully folded and smelling faintly of lavender. She made up the bed in the child's room while Emma explored quietly. The heat worked, the lights worked, the water ran clear and cold from the taps. It was as if the cottage had been waiting, fully functional, for exactly this moment. By the time Patricia had finished, night had fallen completely. The snow was coming down harder now, thick flakes swirling in the beam of the porch light. She stood at the front door, her coat buttoned, her bag slung over her shoulder. "I have to go," she said reluctantly. "But I'll be back first thing in the morning, Christmas Eve. I'll bring food and some clothes for you, okay?" Emma nodded, standing small in the middle of the front room. Patricia knelt down and pulled her into a hug. "You're so brave, Emma. So brave. If you need anything at all, you call me. My number's on the counter." "Okay," Emma whispered. Patricia pulled back, her eyes shining. "Lock the door behind me." Emma did. And then she was alone. The cottage was silent except for the soft ticking of a clock somewhere in the kitchen and the faint whisper of wind against the windows. Emma stood in the middle of the living room, clutching her rabbit, and felt the weight of her aloneness settle over her like a heavy blanket. She walked back to the child's room and sat on the edge of the bed. The quilt was soft beneath her fingers. She looked around at the dolls, the desk, the pictures on the wall. Whoever had lived here, whoever this room had been meant for, was gone. Just like her parents. Tears finally came. Hot and silent, they streamed down her face as she curled up on the bed, pulling the quilt over herself. She cried for her mother's laugh, for her father's hugs, for the yellow house on Maple Street that she'd never see again, for the Christmas that would never come, Eventually, exhaustion pulled her under, and she fell asleep, her face buried in the pillow, her rabbit held tight against her chest. She woke some time later. The room was dark, the only light coming from the pale glow of snow through the window. The wind had picked up, rattling the panes softly. Emma lay still, disoriented, her eyes adjusting to the shadows. That's when she heard it. A sound, faint but distinct, coming from below. Thump. She sat up slowly, her heart beginning to race. Thump, thump. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Not the sound of the house settling, not the wind. Something else. Emma slid out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. She crept to the doorway and peered out into the hallway. The cottage was silent except for that sound. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the kitchen. She moved quietly down the hallway, her pulse pounding in her ears. When she reached the kitchen, she stopped. Everything looked the same. The stove, the sink, the shelves. But the sound was louder now, more insistent. Thump, thump. It was coming from behind the pantry. Emma approached slowly. The pantry was a narrow closet set into the wall, its door slightly ajar. She pulled it open. Inside were shelves lined with old jars and cans, dusty but neatly arranged. But the sound wasn't coming from the shelves. It was coming from behind them. She stepped inside, her hands trembling. She reached out and pushed against the back wall of the pantry. It moved. Not much. Just a slight give, like it wasn't solid, like it was hiding something. Emma's breath came faster. She ran her fingers along the edge of the back panel and found a seam, almost invisible in the dim light. She pushed harder. The panel swung inward with a soft creak, revealing a narrow opening, and beyond it, descending into darkness, was a staircase. Emma stood frozen, staring down into the black. The sound had stopped. The house was silent again, but she could feel it now, a pull, a sense that something was waiting for her below. Something important, something that had been hidden for a very long time. She looked back toward the hallway, toward the safety of the little bedroom with its lavender walls and soft quilt. She could close the panel, pretend she'd never seen it, go back to bed and wait for Miss Patricia in the morning. But she didn't. Instead, Emma reached for the light switch on the wall beside the hidden door. Her fingers found it. She flicked it on. A bare bulb illuminated the staircase, revealing stone steps that descended steeply into a basement she hadn't known existed. Emma took a breath, clutched her rabbit tighter, and stepped onto the first stair. The wood creaked beneath her weight. She descended slowly, one step at a time, her shadow stretching long and thin against the stone walls. At the bottom, she found herself in a small underground room. The air was cool and dry, untouched by the dampness she'd expected. And in the center of the room, beneath the pale glow of the single overhead bulb, sat a large wooden chest, ornate, ancient, locked, and waiting. Emma stood at the bottom of the stone staircase, her small frame casting a long shadow across the underground room. The air down here was different from the cottage above, not musty or damp like a forgotten basement should be, but cool and still, like the inside of a church, like a place that had been sealed away with intention, with reverence, with secrets too important to decay. The room was larger than she'd expected, perhaps 15 feet across and 20 feet long. The walls were stone, the same grey stone as the cottage's exterior, and they seemed to absorb the weak light from the single bulb overhead. But what made Emma's breath catch wasn't the walls themselves. It was what covered them. Photographs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, arranged in careful rows across every available surface. Some were framed, others were pinned directly to the stone. They were old, the kind of photographs that had turned sepia with age, their edges curled and yellowed. Emma stepped closer, her rabbit dangling from one hand, her eyes wide. The photographs told a story. In the earliest ones, there was a young couple. The woman had dark hair styled in the waves, popular in what Emma guessed was the 1940s or 50s. She wore dresses with defined waists and full skirts. The man beside her was tall, lean, with kind eyes and a shy smile. They stood in front of what looked like a laboratory, his arm around her shoulders, both of them squinting into the sun. The next row of photographs showed the same couple, older now, standing in front of this very cottage. It looked newer in the pictures, the stone lighter, the roof freshly shingled. The woman held a baby in her arms, wrapped in a white blanket. Her smile was radiant, transformative. The man stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her back, looking down at the baby with an expression of pure wonder. Emma moved along the wall, following the chronology. The baby became a toddler, a little girl with dark curls and bright eyes, wearing overalls and holding a stuffed rabbit that looked remarkably similar to the one Emma carried. There were pictures of birthday parties, Christmas mornings with a tree in the corner of the cottage's living room, the girl on a tricycle, the girl helping her mother in the garden, the girl sitting at a desk that Emma recognized as the one in the upstairs bedroom, drawing with crayons. The photographs were full of light and love and ordinary happiness. A family living a quiet life in this cottage, building memories, creating a world. And then, abruptly, the photographs changed. The little girl disappeared. The remaining pictures showed only the woman, older now, her hair streaked with grey. She stood alone in front of the cottage, alone in the garden, alone at the kitchen table. Her smile was gone. Her eyes, once bright with joy, were hollow and distant. The man was gone too. In his place were photographs of a headstone, flowers placed carefully at its base. The final photographs on the wall showed the woman as an elderly lady, frail and bent, standing in this very basement room. She was looking directly at the camera, her expression unreadable. Behind her sat the chest, the same ornate wooden chest that now rested in the center of the room, waiting. Emma's throat tightened. She didn't know who these people were, but she understood the trajectory of their story. Love, joy, loss, grief. The same trajectory her own life had just taken. She turned away from the photographs and looked around the rest of the room. In one corner sat a small writing desk, its surface covered with papers and envelopes. A wooden chair was tucked beneath it. Against the opposite wall stood a tall bookshelf filled with leather-bound journals and photo albums, and in the center of it all, commanding attention like an altar, was the chest. It was beautiful. Made of dark wood, possibly mahogany or walnut, with intricate carvings along its edges. Vines and flowers wound across the lid, so detailed Emma could see individual leaves and petals. The corners were reinforced with brass fittings that had tarnished to a deep green with age. A large brass lock secured the front, old-fashioned and imposing. Emma approached it slowly, almost reverently. She knelt down and ran her fingers over the carved surface. The wood was smooth, polished, cared for. Someone had loved this chest. Someone had protected it. She tried the lock. It didn't budge. Emma sat back on her heels and looked around. If there was a chest, there had to be a key. But where? Her eyes fell on the writing desk. She stood and walked over to it, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. The desk's surface was covered with papers, all of them yellowed with age. She picked up the first one carefully. It was a letter, handwritten in elegant cursive. "My dearest Margaret," it began, "I cannot tell you how much your visit meant to me. The house feels so empty now that you've gone, but knowing that someone still remembers, still cares, brings me comfort in these long days. The cottage remains as it was. I cannot bring myself to change anything. Every object, every photograph, every piece of furniture holds her memory, and I am not ready to let go. I don't think I ever will be." The letter was dated October 8, 1998, and signed simply, Eleanor. Emma set it down and picked up another. This one was addressed to no one, just words on a page. Today would have been Catherine's 40th birthday. I still bake her favorite cake every year, chocolate with vanilla frosting, even though there's no one to eat it. I light a candle and I sing, my voice cracking on every word. The house knows. The walls remember her laughter, her footsteps running down the hallway, her questions about everything and nothing. Sometimes I swear I can still hear her calling for me. "Mama," she'd say, "come look at what I found." Mama, can we go to the garden? Mama, will you read me a story? I would give everything I have, every penny, every possession, every remaining day of my life, just to hear her voice one more time. Emma's hands trembled as she read. Catherine. That was the little girl in the photographs, the one who disappeared from the pictures, the one who never grew up. She set the letter down and picked up a journal from the shelf. The leather cover was worn smooth, the pages brittle. She opened it carefully. The first entry was dated January 3rd, 1961. We buried Catherine today. The ground was frozen and it took the men hours to dig deep enough. She looked so small in that coffin, so impossibly small. She was only 7 years old. 7 years, 3 months and 12 days. The doctors said it was pneumonia, that her lungs were too weak, that there was nothing more they could do, but I should have done more. I should have seen it sooner. I should have saved her. Thomas tries to comfort me. He says it wasn't my fault that these things happen, that we must have faith. But I cannot find faith when my daughter is in the ground and I am still here, breathing, living, when she cannot. The cottage feels like a tomb. I cannot bear to look at her room, but I cannot bear to change it either. So it remains, frozen, a monument to the life she should have lived. Emma's vision blurred with tears. She wiped them away and continued reading. Entry after entry chronicled Eleanor's grief, the way it consumed her, the way it never lessened, just changed shape. There were entries about Thomas, Eleanor's husband, and how he'd thrown himself into his work to cope. He was an inventor, the journal revealed. He'd designed mechanical parts for industrial machinery, held several patents, and had made a considerable fortune from his innovations. An entry from 1968 read, Thomas passed away this morning. Heart attack, they said. Sudden, painless. I think he's been dying slowly since we lost Catherine, and his heart simply gave up the fight. I am alone now. Truly alone. The money he left me is substantial, more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But what good is money when everyone you love is gone? What purpose does it serve? I have been thinking about Catherine's room, about this cottage, about what it all means now that I am the only one left to remember. Emma turned more pages, watching Eleanor's handwriting change over the years. It grew shakier, less certain, the script of someone aging and weakening. But the love in her words never diminished. A journal entry from 2003 caught Emma's attention. I have made a decision. I am 79 years old. My health is failing. The doctors say I have perhaps a year, maybe 2 if I'm fortunate, though I'm not certain I want to be. I have lived 52 years without my daughter and 35 without my husband. I have lived in this cottage surrounded by memories that bring both comfort and unbearable pain. I have money that serves no purpose, collecting dust in banks and investment accounts, and I have come to understand something important. Grief is not meant to die with us. It's meant to transform into something that helps others heal. I cannot bring Catherine back. I cannot undo the past. But I can ensure that this cottage, this place that held so much love, serves a purpose beyond preserving ghosts. I can make certain that another child, another soul who has lost everything, might find shelter here, might find hope, might find a reason to keep going. The lawyers think I'm mad. They don't understand why I would deed the cottage to the county with such specific stipulations, but I know what I'm doing. I am preparing a gift, not for someone I know, but for someone who will need it. Someone who will understand loss the way I do. Someone young enough to still build a life from the ashes. I only hope they find what I've left behind. I only hope it helps. Emma's chest ached as she read. This woman, this Eleanor, had lost her daughter more than 60 years ago and had spent the rest of her life carrying that grief. And somehow, impossibly, she had transformed it into something that was now helping Emma. She set down the journal and picked up another letter, this one on heavier paper, more formal. To the estate executors, I am of sound mind and clear intent when I write these instructions. Upon my death, the cottage at 15 Winterbrook Lane is to be deeded to the county under the following conditions. 1. The property must be maintained in perpetuity. Utilities kept active. Structure kept sound. 2. The cottage may only be used for emergency housing for orphaned children in crisis. No other purpose. 3. The basement is to remain sealed unless the occupant discovers the entrance on their own. If they do not find it, it remains hidden. 4. No one is to remove or alter the contents of the basement without the express permission of the child in residence. 5. When the right child comes, when the child who truly needs what I've left behind arrives, they will know, they will understand, and they will find the key. Trust in this. I have prepared everything. The letter was dated November 19th, 2009, and signed Eleanor Margaret Ashford. Emma looked up from the letter, her heart pounding. The right child. The one who truly needs it. Was that her? Was she the one Eleanor had been waiting for? She looked around the basement again, at the photographs, at the journals, at the chest. Everything here had been left with intention. Nothing was random. Eleanor had spent years preparing this room, this gift for someone she would never meet. Someone who would understand loss the way she had, someone orphaned and alone. Someone exactly like Emma. Her eyes moved back to the chest. The key. Eleanor had written that the child would find the key. But where? Emma stood and walked slowly around the room, studying everything with new focus. The photographs on the walls, the books on the shelves, the papers on the desk. She opened drawers. She looked behind frames. She ran her hands along the stone walls, searching for hidden compartments or loose stones. Nothing. She was about to give up when her eyes landed on something she'd missed before. On top of the bookshelf, barely visible in the dim light, sat a small wooden box. It was carved with the same vine pattern as the chest, clearly made by the same hands. Emma pulled the chair over from the desk and climbed up onto it, stretching to reach the box. Her fingers closed around it, and she carefully brought it down. It was heavier than she expected, about the size of a shoebox with a small brass clasp on the front. She sat down on the floor, cross-legged, and placed the box in her lap. The clasp opened easily. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, was a music box, the kind with a ballerina that spun when you wound it up. The ballerina's paint was chipped, her pink dress faded to almost white, but she was still beautiful in a worn, loved way. Emma lifted the music box out carefully. On the bottom was a small brass key, the kind you used to wind the mechanism. She turned it slowly. The ballerina began to spin, and a delicate melody filled the quiet basement. It was a lullaby, achingly sweet and impossibly sad. Emma recognized it. Her mother used to hum it when she tucked her in at night. As the ballerina turned, Emma noticed something. The inside of the music box lid was lined with white satin, and there was a small lump beneath the fabric, something hidden. She ran her fingers over it and felt a hard shape. Carefully, she peeled back the edge of the satin, and there it was, a key. Small, brass, old-fashioned. The same tarnished green as the lock on the chest. Emma's breath caught. Her hands trembled as she pulled the key free from its hiding place. The music box continued to play its haunting melody as she stood, the key clutched in her palm, and walked toward the chest. She knelt in front of it, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it. Whatever Eleanor had left behind, whatever gift she'd prepared, was inside this chest. And Emma was about to discover what a woman she'd never met had deemed important enough to preserve for decades. She slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. She turned it slowly, feeling the mechanism click and release. The lock opened. What happens next will reveal a secret that's been buried for 30 years, transform the life of one grieving child, and prove that sometimes the greatest gifts come from those who understand loss better than anyone else. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Emma lifted the lid. The hinges creaked softly, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent basement. The music box had stopped playing. Everything was still. Inside the chest, illuminated by the pale overhead light, was not what Emma had expected. She'd imagined family heirlooms, maybe. Photographs, letters, things with sentimental value but little else. What she found was something entirely different. The chest was filled with papers, stacks and stacks of them, all carefully organized in labeled folders and envelopes. But these weren't just letters or journals. These were documents. Official-looking documents with seals and signatures and numbers that made Emma's head spin. She reached in and pulled out the first envelope. It was made of heavy cream-colored paper, and across the front, written in Eleanor's elegant handwriting, was a single word: bonds. Emma opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of certificates, each one printed on thick paper with ornate borders and official stamps. She couldn't understand most of the words, but she could read the numbers. Each certificate had a face value printed at the top: $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. She counted them. There were at least 30 certificates in this envelope alone. She set it aside and pulled out another envelope labeled Stock Certificates. Inside were more official documents, these from companies Emma recognized. Some were from technology companies, others from pharmaceutical corporations. Each certificate represented shares, and beside each one, Eleanor had paper-clipped a handwritten note with the current estimated value. Emma's eyes widened as she read the numbers. $50,000, $120,000, $300,000. The amounts were staggering, incomprehensible. She reached deeper into the chest and found a leather portfolio, heavy and bulging. She unzipped it. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, bundled with paper bands. She'd never seen this much cash in her life. Her parents had kept maybe $200 or $300 in the house for emergencies, and that had seemed like a lot. But this was hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash alone. Beneath the money were more envelopes, more stock certificates, more bonds, investment statements from banks Emma had heard of in commercials, account numbers, passwords written in sealed envelopes, everything meticulously organized and labeled. At the very bottom of the chest, beneath all the financial documents, was a large manila envelope sealed with wax. Across the front, in careful script, were the words, "For the child who finds this." Emma's hands shook as she broke the seal and pulled out the contents. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written on the same heavy cream paper as the bond envelopes. Attached to it with a paperclip was a single photograph. Emma looked at the photograph first. It showed a little girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, sitting on the front steps of the cottage. She had dark, curly hair and bright eyes. She was wearing overalls and holding a stuffed rabbit. She was smiling at the camera with the kind of pure, unguarded joy that only children possess. It was Catherine, Eleanor's daughter, and she looked exactly like Emma. The resemblance was uncanny. The same dark hair, the same delicate features, the same slight gap between her front teeth that Emma had always been self-conscious about. They could have been sisters. They could have been the same person, separated by 60 years. Emma's vision blurred with tears as she set the photograph aside and began to read the letter. "To whoever you are, if you are reading this, then you have found what I left behind. You have discovered the entrance to this room, located the music box, found the key, and opened this chest. That means you were meant to. That means you are the one I have been waiting for, even though I will never meet you, even though I will be long gone by the time you read these words. My name is Eleanor Margaret Ashford. I was born in 1924 and lived my entire adult life in the cottage above. I married a brilliant man named Thomas. We had one daughter, Catherine Rose. She was the light of our lives, the center of our universe, the reason we woke up every morning with gratitude in our hearts. We had 7 years with her, 7 years, 3 months, and 12 days to be exact, before illness took her from us. She died in the winter of 1961, and I have not been the same since. Thomas passed in 1968. His heart, the doctors said, though I believe it was grief that killed him. After he was gone, I was left alone in this cottage with more money than I knew what to do with, and no one to spend it on. Thomas had been a successful inventor. His patents made us wealthy, very wealthy, and when he died, he left everything to me. For years I didn't know what to do with it. I lived simply. I maintained the cottage. I kept Catherine's room exactly as it was. I existed rather than lived, waiting for the day I would join my family. But as I grew older, as my health began to fail, I realized that letting all of this die with me would be a waste. Not a waste of money, though that too, but a waste of opportunity. A waste of the chance to transform my grief into something meaningful. A waste of the chance to help another child who had lost what I lost, who understood the particular loneliness of being young and orphaned and adrift in a world that suddenly makes no sense. So I made arrangements. I instructed my lawyers to deed this cottage to the county upon my death with very specific conditions. It was to be used only for emergency housing for orphaned children. I knew that if a child ended up here, truly needed to be here, it meant they had nowhere else to go. It meant they had lost everything, just as I had, just as you have. I also left instructions that the basement remain sealed unless discovered by the occupant. I wanted whoever found this room to do so on their own. I wanted them to be curious enough, brave enough, lonely enough to search, because finding this room means you were looking for something, for answers, for connection, for hope. And now you have found it. Inside this chest is my entire estate, everything Thomas and I accumulated over our lifetimes, bearer bonds, stock certificates, cash, investment accounts. The total value, as of my last calculation in 2009, is approximately $200 million. By the time you read this, depending on how the markets have performed, it could be worth significantly more. Perhaps $250 million. Perhaps $295 million. Perhaps more. All of it is yours. I know this must seem impossible. I know you must be frightened, confused, overwhelmed, but please understand this is not a mistake. This is not some cruel joke. This is a gift, freely given, from someone who understands what you are going through. From someone who wants desperately to ease your pain in the only way she knows how. You cannot bring back the people you have lost. Believe me, I know. No amount of money will fill the hole their absence has left in your heart. But money can give you choices. It can give you security. It can give you the freedom to grieve without the added burden of wondering where you will sleep or what you will eat. It can give you the chance to build a life, not in spite of your loss, but in honor of it. Use this gift however you see fit. Build something beautiful. Help others who are suffering. Honor those you have lost by living fully, bravely, joyfully when you are ready. Do not let grief consume you the way it consumed me. I wasted 50 years in this cottage, alone, unable to move forward. Do not make the same mistake. Live, my dear child. Live with everything you have. Live for yourself and for those who cannot. Live because you deserve to. Live because the people you lost would want you to. I wish I could be there to hold you, to tell you it will be okay, to promise you that the pain lessens with time. I cannot promise you that because it would be a lie. The pain does not lessen, but you grow around it. You build a life that incorporates it rather than surrenders to it. And one day, you will wake up and realize that you have laughed, really laughed, and the guilt you feel will be less than the joy you experienced. And that is when you will know you are going to survive this. I have left detailed instructions with the law firm of Patterson and Associates in the city. They have managed my estate since Thomas's death. When you contact them, they will help you navigate all of this. They will ensure the money is protected in your name. They will make certain no one can take advantage of you. I have paid them handsomely to serve as your advocates, and they have been instructed to prioritize your well-being above all else. You are not alone, even though it feels that way. You have this cottage, you have this gift, and you have a future that is still unwritten. Be brave, little one. You are stronger than you know. With all my love and hope, Eleanor Margaret Ashford. P.S. In the photograph I have included, you will see my Catherine. She would have been exactly your age when that picture was taken. I like to think that perhaps, in some way by helping you, I am helping her. That somehow, across time and space, this gift reaches both of you. Keep the photograph if you wish. I think she would have liked you very much." Emma finished reading and sat in absolute silence. Her hands trembled. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She read the letter again, then a third time. The words didn't change. The numbers didn't change. $295 million. That's what Eleanor had estimated. $295 million left to a stranger. Left to whoever was unlucky enough, lost enough, broken enough to end up in this cottage on Christmas Eve with nowhere else to go. Left to her. Emma looked around the basement, at the photographs on the walls, at the journals filled with grief, at the chest full of more money than she could comprehend. She thought about Eleanor, alone in this cottage for 50 years, preserving her daughter's memory, planning this impossible gift. She thought about Catherine, dead at 7, never knowing that her mother's love would one day save another little girl's life. She thought about her own parents, buried 3 weeks ago, their funeral a blur of tears and strangers. She thought about the yellow house on Maple Street that was no longer hers. She thought about Christmas morning, just 2 days away, that she would spend alone. And then she thought about Eleanor's words. "Live, my dear child. Live with everything you have." Emma carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. She looked at the photograph of Catherine one more time, at the little girl who could have been her twin, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, opening, like a door that had been locked suddenly swinging wide. She couldn't process this. Not tonight. Not alone in this basement in the middle of the night. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, when Miss Patricia came back, she would tell her everything. She would show her the basement, the chest, the letter, and together they would figure out what came next. For now, Emma gathered the letter, the photograph, and one of the journals. She left the chest open, the documents inside untouched. She climbed the stairs slowly, turned off the basement light, and closed the hidden panel behind her. Back in the child's room, she set the journal and letter on the desk and placed the photograph of Catherine on the nightstand beside the bed. She climbed under the quilt and lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The wind whispered against the windows, and somewhere deep in the cottage's bones, Emma could almost feel Eleanor's presence. Not haunting, not frightening, just there, watching over her, protecting her. Emma reached out and touched the photograph in the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for finding me." She didn't know if she was talking to Eleanor, or to Catherine, or to her own parents, or to God, or to no one at all. But she said it anyway, because it felt true. Because for the first time since the accident, she felt something other than crushing grief. She felt hope. And as Emma finally drifted off to sleep, her fingers wrapped around the photograph, she dreamed not of loss, but of possibility. Of a future that suddenly, impossibly, held more than just survival. She dreamed of living. Emma woke to pale winter light filtering through the curtains of the child's bedroom. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot about the accident, about the funeral, about being alone. She simply existed in that soft space between sleep and waking, where the world hasn't yet reminded you of its cruelty. Then she saw the photograph on the nightstand, Catherine's face staring back at her. And it all came rushing back. The cottage, the basement, the chest, Eleanor's letter, $295 million. Emma sat up slowly, her heart beginning to race. Had it been real? Had she actually found what she thought she'd found? Or had grief and exhaustion created some kind of elaborate dream? She slid out of bed and walked to the desk where she'd left Eleanor's letter. It was still there, the heavy cream paper real and solid beneath her fingers. She unfolded it and read the first few lines again, just to be sure. It was real. All of it was real. A knock at the front door made her jump. She looked at the small clock on the nightstand. It was 8:37 in the morning, Christmas Eve morning. "Emma?" Miss Patricia's voice called from outside. "Emma, honey, it's me. I brought breakfast." Emma pulled on the sweater she'd worn yesterday and padded down the hallway in her bare feet. She opened the front door to find Patricia standing on the porch, her arms loaded with grocery bags, her cheeks pink from the cold. Snow had piled up overnight, covering the cottage and the surrounding woods in a blanket of pristine white. "Merry Christmas Eve," Patricia said with a warm smile, though her eyes held the same sadness they'd carried since Emma had met her. She stepped inside, stomping snow from her boots. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I brought a bit of everything. Pancake mix, eggs, bacon, orange juice, hot chocolate mix." She set the bags on the kitchen counter and turned to look at Emma. Her smile faltered. "Sweetheart, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma stood in the kitchen doorway, her hands clasped in front of her, trying to figure out how to say what needed to be said. "How did you tell someone you'd found hundreds of millions of dollars in a basement? How did you make words that sounded like a fairy tale feel like truth?" "Miss Patricia," Emma said quietly, "I need to show you something." Patricia's expression shifted immediately to concern. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I found something last night. Something important." Emma led her through the kitchen to the pantry. She pulled open the hidden panel behind the shelves, revealing the staircase descending into darkness. Patricia stared at the opening, her mouth falling open slightly. "I had no idea this was here," she breathed. "The county file didn't mention a basement." "I don't think anyone knew," Emma said. "I only found it because I heard a sound. I think maybe it was the wind or the house settling, but it made me look." She flicked on the light and started down the stairs. Patricia followed, her footsteps cautious on the stone steps. When they reached the bottom, Patricia stopped and stared. The photographs covering the walls, the desk with its scattered papers, the journals on the shelves, and in the center of the room, the chest, still open, its contents visible even from the staircase. "Oh my God," Patricia whispered. Emma walked to the chest and gestured to it. Her name was Eleanor. She owned this cottage. She had a daughter named Catherine who died when she was 7. Her husband died a few years after that. She was alone for a really long time. Patricia moved slowly around the room, looking at the photographs, her hand over her mouth. Emma, this is someone's entire life down here." "I know." Emma picked up one of the envelopes from the chest. "She left all of this for whoever ended up here, for whoever needed it. She left a letter explaining everything." She handed Patricia the letter. The social worker took it with trembling hands and began to read. Emma watched as her expression changed from confusion to shock to disbelief to something that looked like tears. When Patricia finished, she looked up at Emma, her eyes wide and glistening. "This says, Emma, this says she left you hundreds of millions of dollars." $295 million, Emma said quietly. "That's what she estimated. Maybe more now." Patricia sat down hard on the stone floor, still clutching the letter. She read it again, then looked at the contents of the chest. The bonds, the stock certificates, the cash. She reached in and pulled out one of the bundles of $100 bills just to touch it, to confirm it was real. "This can't be real," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is... Emma, do you understand what this means?" "I think so," Emma said. "It means I don't have to worry about money anymore." Patricia let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Sweetheart, you will never have to worry about money again for the rest of your life. Your children won't have to worry about money. Your grandchildren won't have to worry about money. This is generational wealth. This is..." She trailed off, shaking her head in amazement. "But it doesn't bring my parents back," Emma said softly. Patricia's expression crumbled. She set down the money and pulled Emma into a tight hug. "No, baby. No, it doesn't. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." They sat on the basement floor for a long moment, holding each other while the weight of everything settled around them. Finally, Patricia pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Okay," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "Okay, we need to handle this properly. We need to call the county attorney. We need to authenticate these documents. We need to make sure everything is legal and legitimate, and we need to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Emma asked. Patricia's expression hardened. "From people who will try to take advantage of this. From distant relatives who will suddenly appear claiming they deserve a share. From lawyers who will try to contest the will. From everyone who will see a 9-year-old orphan with a fortune and think they can manipulate or exploit you. She cupped Emma's face gently. But I won't let that happen. I promise you I will not let that happen. Within 2 hours, the cottage was filled with people. County officials, police officers, lawyers from the firm Eleanor had mentioned in her letter, Patterson and Associates, a forensic accountant who specialized in estate authentication. They moved through the basement carefully, documenting everything, photographing the chest and its contents, handling the documents with gloved hands. Emma sat upstairs in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, watching through the window as more cars arrived. Patricia had made her pancakes, but they sat mostly untouched on a plate beside her. The stuffed rabbit was back in her arms, held tight against her chest. One of the lawyers, a woman named Margaret Patterson, sat down beside her. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Emma," she said gently. "My name is Margaret. I worked with Mrs. Ashford for many, many years. She told me about her plans for this cottage, for the gift she was leaving. I want you to know that everything she did was legal and intentional. She prepared for this moment very carefully." "Did you know her?" Emma asked. Margaret nodded. "I did. She was a remarkable woman, brilliant, kind, and deeply, deeply sad. Losing her daughter and then her husband changed her fundamentally. But in her final years, planning this gift gave her purpose. She talked about you often." Emma blinked. "About me? But she didn't know me." "Not you specifically," Margaret clarified, "but the child who would eventually need this place. She called you the one who would understand. She said when that child came, when someone who had lost everything ended up here, they would know exactly what to do with her gift. And she was very specific in her will that the cottage and everything in it would belong to that child, free and clear." "So it's really mine?" Emma asked, her voice small. "It really is. The county can't claim it. The state can't claim it. No distant relatives can contest it because Eleanor had none. It all belongs to you, Emma. Every penny, every stock, every bond. It's yours to do with as you wish." Emma looked down at her lap. "I don't know what to do with it." Margaret smiled. "You don't have to know right now. That's what trustees are for. We'll set up a trust fund. Miss Patricia will be appointed as your legal guardian and trustee until you turn 18. She'll manage the money responsibly, make sure it's invested properly, and ensure you have everything you need. But the decisions about how to use it, what matters to you, what you want to support or build or create, those decisions will always be yours." Over the next few hours, the investigation confirmed what Eleanor's letter had promised. The documents were authentic. The bonds were valid. The stock certificates were legitimate and worth even more than Eleanor had estimated due to market growth over the past 15 years since her death. The cash was real. The bank accounts existed and were fully funded. The total value, once everything was calculated and verified, came to $297,400,000 and change. Emma listened as the numbers were read aloud and felt nothing. It was too big to comprehend, too abstract to feel real. What felt real was the photograph of Catherine on the nightstand upstairs. What felt real was Eleanor's handwritten letter. What felt real was the understanding that someone she'd never met had loved her enough to give her a future. By late afternoon, word had begun to spread through Millbrook. It started with whispers, the way all news does in small towns. Someone at the county office mentioned it to a friend. That friend told their spouse. By dinner time, half the town knew that little Emma, the orphaned girl whose parents had died in that terrible accident, had inherited a fortune from the old Ashford estate. The reactions were mixed. Some people were genuinely happy, relieved that Emma wouldn't face poverty on top of grief. They remembered her parents fondly and felt this was some kind of cosmic justice, a small mercy in the face of unbearable loss. Others were skeptical, suspicious. They questioned the legitimacy of the inheritance. They wondered if it was a scam or a mistake. They muttered about how a 9-year-old couldn't possibly be trusted with that kind of money. And then there were those who saw opportunity. By the next morning, Christmas Day, 3 different people had come forward, claiming to be distant relatives of Emma's parents, despite the fact that none of them had attended the funeral or reached out to her before. Each one brought a lawyer. Each one demanded a share of the inheritance. Patricia turned them all away at the cottage door, her voice firm and her eyes hard. "This inheritance has nothing to do with Emma's parents," she told them. "It came from Eleanor Ashford's estate, which was left specifically and legally to the orphaned child in residence at this cottage. Emma's blood relatives, if you are who you claim to be, have no legal standing to contest it. And even if you did, you'd have to go through me, the county, and Patterson and Associates to do it. So unless you want to waste your money on legal fees for a case you cannot win, I suggest you leave this child alone to grieve in peace." Most of them left. One threatened to sue. Patricia handed him Margaret Patterson's business card and told him to have his lawyer call her directly. He never did. The local newspaper ran a story on Christmas morning. "Orphaned girl inherits fortune. Millbrook child receives unexpected gift." The article was respectful, focusing more on Eleanor's remarkable act of generosity than on Emma herself. But by that evening, larger papers had picked up the story. By the following day, it had gone regional. By the week's end, it was national news. Orphan finds $297 million treasure in cottage basement. Grieving child's Christmas miracle. Mysterious inheritance changes everything. Woman's 30-year plan to help orphan stranger finally fulfilled. News vans appeared at the end of Winterbrook Lane. Reporters tried to get close to the cottage. Patricia had the county police station position an officer at the property entrance to turn them away. The officer, a young man named Danny, who had gone to school with Emma's mother, took his job seriously. No one got past him. Through it all, Emma remained quiet. She spent Christmas Day in the cottage with Patricia, the two of them eating the breakfast Patricia had brought the day before, and trying to create some semblance of normalcy in the midst of chaos. Patricia had brought a small artificial tree and a few ornaments. They decorated it together in silence, and when they were done, Emma plugged in the lights and stared at them for a long time. "My mom would have loved this tree," she said finally. "She always said Christmas trees should be full of light." Patricia sat down beside her on the floor, both of them looking at the tree. "Tell me about her." And Emma did. She talked about her mother's terrible singing voice and her incredible chocolate chip cookies. She talked about how her father could fix anything with duct tape and determination. She talked about their traditions, their jokes, their ordinary, beautiful life. She cried while she talked, and Patricia held her, and the money in the basement didn't matter at all in that moment. Because what Emma wanted, what she would have traded every penny for, was something no amount of money could buy. She wanted her parents back. On December 27th, Emma was taken to the county courthouse for an emergency hearing. Margaret Patterson had filed paperwork to have the inheritance legally confirmed and to establish the trust fund that would protect Emma's assets. The hearing was closed to the public, but the courtroom was still full. County officials, representatives from the State Attorney General's office, journalists waiting outside, and Emma, small and quiet in a chair that was too big for her, Patricia sitting beside her with a protective hand on her shoulder. The judge, an older woman named Judge Carolyn Reeves, reviewed the documents carefully. She read Eleanor's will. She examined the authentication reports. She studied the photographs from the basement, the journals, the letter addressed to the child who would find it. Finally, she looked at Emma over the top of her reading glasses. "Miss Emma," she said, her voice formal but not unkind, "do you understand what's happening here today?" Emma nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They're making sure the money really belongs to me." "That's right, and I want to ask you a question. What do you want to do with it?" The courtroom went silent. Everyone leaned forward slightly, waiting for the answer. Emma thought for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to pay for my parents' funeral. The county paid for it because I didn't have any money, and that doesn't seem right. They should have a nice memorial, one that says how much they were loved." Judge Reeves's expression softened. "That's a very mature and thoughtful answer. What else?" "I want to stay in the cottage Emma said. "With Miss Patricia, if she'll let me. I know it's not my parents' house, but it feels safe. And I think Mrs. Ashford would want me to stay there." "I'm sure she would," the judge agreed. "Anything else?" Emma looked down at her hands. "I want to keep the pictures in the basement, the ones of Catherine and Mrs. Ashford. I want to remember them. I want to make sure people know their story." Judge Reeves smiled, and there were tears in her eyes. "Young lady, I have been on the bench for 23 years, and I have overseen hundreds of estate cases. I have seen people fight over money until families are destroyed. I have seen greed turn good people into monsters, but I have never, in all my years, seen anything like this. Eleanor Ashford spent decades planning this gift. She chose not to leave her fortune to institutions or organizations, but to wait for the right child, the right moment, the right need. And looking at you, hearing your words, I believe with all my heart that she chose wisely." She signed the documents with a flourish. "The estate is hereby confirmed as belonging to Emma Rose Henderson, to be held in trust until she reaches the age of 18, with Patricia Moreno serving as legal guardian and trustee. The cottage at 15 Winterbrook Lane is confirmed as her primary residence. This court finds no legal grounds for contest and no reason to delay the transfer of assets. Case closed." She banged her gavel once. "Merry Christmas, Emma. May this gift bring you peace and a future full of hope." The courtroom erupted in quiet applause. Margaret Patterson hugged Emma tightly. Patricia wiped tears from her eyes. And Emma, sitting in that too-big chair in a courtroom full of strangers, felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just an orphan anymore. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance or tragedy. She was a girl with choices, with resources, with a future that stretched out before her full of possibility. She was Eleanor's legacy, Catherine's echo, and her parents' daughter, carrying their love forward into whatever came next. That evening, back at the cottage, Emma stood in the basement one more time. Patricia was upstairs making dinner, giving her some space. Emma walked along the wall of photographs, studying each one carefully. Eleanor as a young woman. Thomas with his shy smile. Catherine at every age from infant to 7. She stopped at the final photograph, the one of elderly Eleanor standing beside the chest, looking directly at the camera. Emma reached out and touched the frame. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I'll make you proud. I promise I'll use this gift the way you wanted. I promise I'll live." The cottage settled around her, wood creaking softly as the temperature dropped outside, and in that sound, Emma could almost hear a voice, warm and gentle, saying, "I know you will, dear child. I know you will." She climbed the stairs slowly and closed the hidden panel behind her. Tomorrow, Patricia would help her contact the funeral home about her parents' memorial. Tomorrow, they would start planning what came next. Tomorrow, she would begin the long, difficult process of learning to live with grief while also embracing hope. But tonight, on this cold December evening, Emma simply sat at the kitchen table while Patricia made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, her mother's favorite meal. They ate together in comfortable silence, and when they were done, Patricia suggested they read one of the books from the cottage's living room shelves. They chose a copy of The Secret Garden, its cover worn soft with age. Patricia read aloud while Emma curled up beside her on the sofa, wrapped in Eleanor's quilt, listening to the story of another orphaned child who found healing in an unexpected place. When Patricia's voice grew tired and the chapter ended, Emma looked up at her. "Miss Patricia?" "Yes, sweetheart? Can I call you something else? Not Miss Patricia, just something that feels more like family." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "What would you like to call me?" Emma thought for a moment. "Maybe just Patricia, or Tricia. My mom used to have a friend named Tricia. I always thought it was a nice name." "Tricia," Patricia repeated softly. "I like that. Tricia it is." They sat together as the fire in the fireplace burned low and the snow began to fall again outside. Somewhere in the basement, $297 million sat in a chest, waiting to change the world. But up here, in this small living room, two people who had found each other in the midst of loss were building something even more valuable. They were building a family. The media frenzy continued for another week, then began to fade as newer stories took precedence. The reporters moved on. The curiosity seekers found other spectacles. And slowly, quietly, life in the cottage on Winterbrook Lane began to settle into a new rhythm. Patricia officially became Emma's legal guardian in early January. She moved into the cottage's second bedroom, bringing only a few boxes of belongings. Everything else she needed, the cottage already provided. She continued her work as a social worker, but with reduced hours that allowed her to be home when Emma got out of school. Emma returned to Millbrook Elementary in mid-January. Walking back into those halls was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. The other children stared. Some whispered. Everyone knew what had happened to her parents. Everyone knew about the money. She felt like an exhibit at a museum, something to be observed from a distance but never truly understood. But her best friend Lucy stood by her. On that first day back, Lucy walked right up to her, gave her a fierce hug, and said, "I don't care about any of that stuff. You're still just Emma to me." And slowly, the other children followed Lucy's lead. They stopped staring. They stopped whispering. Emma was invited to sit at lunch tables and join in at recess. She would never be just another kid again, not after everything that had happened, but she could be something close to normal. And that was enough. The inheritance was managed carefully. Margaret Patterson worked with a team of financial advisors to invest the money responsibly. The cottage's utilities were paid automatically from the trust. A college fund was established. Charitable foundations were researched for future donations. But nothing was rushed. Nothing was decided without careful thought and Emma's input, age-appropriate as it was. The first significant decision Emma made was about her parents' memorial. In late January, a beautiful ceremony was held at Millbrook Community Church. The county had provided a simple service when they died, but Emma wanted something more. She wanted her parents to be remembered the way they deserved. She worked with Patricia and the funeral director to plan everything. There were flowers, hundreds of them, because her mother had loved gardens. There was music, her father's favorite songs played on guitar by a local musician. There were photographs displayed on boards around the church, showing David and Sarah Henderson's life together. Their wedding, Emma's birth, family vacations. Ordinary moments made extraordinary by love. The whole town came. The church was packed. People stood in the aisles and filled the vestibule, all of them there to honor two people who had lived quietly but touched many lives. Emma sat in the front row between Patricia and Lucy, and this time she cried. She cried for everything she'd lost and everything she'd never have again. She cried until she had no tears left. But when the service ended and people filed past offering condolences, Emma felt something she hadn't felt since the accident. Closure. Not healing, not yet, but the sense that her parents had been properly honored, that their lives had been celebrated, that they wouldn't be forgotten. After the service, she did something that surprised everyone. She stood at the front of the church and asked if she could speak. The room quieted immediately. Emma's voice was small but steady. "I want to thank everyone for coming today. My parents would have been so happy to see all of you here. They loved this town. They loved their life here. And even though they're gone, I want to make sure their memory stays alive." She took a breath. "The money I inherited, I've been thinking a lot about what to do with it, and I decided that I want to use some of it to help other kids who have lost their parents. Kids like me who don't know where they're going to live or if they'll be okay. I want to start a foundation in my parents' names, the David and Sarah Henderson Foundation. It'll help orphaned children find safe homes and good families. Because that's what my parents would have wanted. They would have wanted me to help others." The church erupted in applause. Patricia squeezed her hand. Margaret Patterson, sitting a few rows back, smiled with tears running down her face. Emma had found her purpose, not in the money itself, but in what the money could do, in the lives it could change, in the hope it could provide to children who, like her, had lost everything but still deserved a future. That night, back at the cottage, Emma sat at the desk in Catherine's room, now her room, and began to write. She wrote a letter to Eleanor, even though Eleanor would never read it. She told her about the memorial, about the foundation, about how she was trying to live the way Eleanor had asked her to. She ended the letter with a promise. I won't waste this gift. I won't let grief consume me the way it consumed you. I will build something beautiful from this tragedy. I will help others. I will live fully and bravely. And I will remember always that you believed in me before you ever knew me. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for waiting all those years. Thank you for turning your grief into my hope. I will make you proud, I promise. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box she kept on her desk, along with Eleanor's original letter and the photograph of Catherine. These were her treasures now, not the money in the bank accounts or the stocks increasing in value, but these pieces of paper that connected her to the people who had shaped her life, both those who had known her and those who had simply loved her from across time. Outside, snow continued to fall softly over the cottage. Inside, a fire crackled in the fireplace. Patricia was in the kitchen making hot chocolate, and Emma, sitting at her desk with a pen in her hand and hope in her heart, was beginning to understand something profound. Loss would always be part of her story. Her parents' death would always hurt. The hole they left would never fully close. But alongside that loss could exist something else. Purpose, connection, love, hope. Eleanor had understood that. She'd lived it for 50 years, turning her unbearable grief into an act of extraordinary generosity. And now Emma would carry that forward, building on the foundation Eleanor had laid, creating something that honored everyone she'd lost, while also celebrating the life she still had ahead of her. She was only 9 years old, but she'd learned what some people never discover in a lifetime. That tragedy doesn't have to define you. That grief can coexist with joy. That the greatest gift you can give is not money, but hope to someone who has lost theirs. And as Emma closed her journal and headed to the kitchen to join Patricia for hot chocolate, she carried with her the wisdom of two remarkable women. Her mother, who had taught her to find beauty in ordinary moments, and Eleanor, who had taught her that even in the darkest grief, there is still room for love. The cottage on Winterbrook Lane would be her home now. Not just a place to sleep, but a sanctuary where broken things could be made whole, where lost children could find their way home, where one woman's 50-year vigil had finally, beautifully, come to fulfillment, and where one small girl, orphaned before Christmas, had discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in chests filled with money, but in the love of strangers who become family, in the courage to keep living despite loss, and in the promise that no matter how dark the winter, spring always, eventually, comes. The years that followed moved like chapters in a book Emma was writing one page at a time. Some chapters were filled with tears and sleepless nights where grief ambushed her without warning. Others were bright with unexpected joy, moments where she laughed so hard she forgot to feel guilty about it. But all of them, every single page, carried the dual weight of loss and hope that had become the foundation of her life. Patricia proved to be more than a guardian. She became the steady presence Emma needed, the adult who showed up every single day without fail. She attended every parent-teacher conference. She sat through every school play, even the terrible ones where Emma forgot her lines. She learned to braid Emma's hair, though it took her 6 months of practice to get it right. She taught Emma how to cook her mother's chocolate chip cookie recipe, both of them crying the first time they pulled them from the oven because they smelled exactly right. The cottage transformed from a place of mystery into a home filled with warmth and life. Patricia added touches that made it theirs without erasing Eleanor's presence. Photographs of Emma and Patricia joined the ones of Eleanor and Catherine on the walls. New books appeared on the shelves alongside the old ones. The kitchen, once pristine and unused, became the heart of the house, constantly filled with the smell of cooking and the sound of conversation. But the basement remained largely unchanged. Emma insisted on it. The photographs stayed on the walls. The journals remained on the shelves. The chest, though emptied of its financial contents and secured in proper accounts, stayed in its place in the center of the room. Once a month, Emma would go down there and sit among Eleanor's memories, reading her journals, studying the photographs, talking to her as if she could hear. "I got an A on my history project," Emma would say, sitting cross-legged on the basement floor. "I did it on women inventors of the 20th century. I included a whole section on Mr. Ashford's patents. I think you would have liked it." Or, "Today was hard. They would have been 42 and 44. Their birthdays. Patricia made their favorite dinner, but it wasn't the same without them. I miss them so much it feels like I can't breathe sometimes. But then I remember what you said about building a life around the pain instead of surrendering to it. So I'm trying. I promise I'm trying." The basement became her sanctuary, the place where she could be completely honest about her grief without worrying about burdening anyone. And somehow, surrounded by Eleanor's pain and Catherine's frozen childhood, Emma felt less alone. The David and Sarah Henderson Foundation launched officially in March of the following year. Emma was 10 years old when she sat at a conference table with Margaret Patterson, Patricia, and a team of advisors, discussing the foundation's mission and structure. Margaret had explained it all carefully, using words Emma could understand. "The foundation will have an endowment of $20 million to start," Margaret said. "That means we'll invest that money, and the earnings from those investments will fund the foundation's activities every year. We'll be able to help children indefinitely without depleting the principal." "What kind of help?" Emma asked. "Whatever you decide," Margaret replied. "Emergency housing, college scholarships, counseling services, support for foster families, medical expenses. Whatever you think would make the biggest difference for kids who've lost their parents." Emma thought about her own experience. The cold institutional offices, the uncertainty, the fear, the desperate scramble to find her a place to stay on Christmas Eve. She remembered how important Patricia had been, how crucial it was to have one person who showed up consistently, who cared. "I want to focus on keeping siblings together," she said finally, "and making sure every kid has someone like Patricia, someone who won't leave." The foundation started small. In its first year, it helped 37 children across the state. It paid for emergency housing when family placements fell through. It provided funding for support groups and therapy. It offered college scholarships to teens aging out of foster care. Every child who received help was sent a letter, not from the foundation's board or staff, but from Emma herself. She wrote them by hand, each one personal and honest. "I know what you're going through," she'd write. "I lost my parents too. I know how much it hurts and how scary everything feels right now. But I want you to know you're not alone. This foundation exists because someone I never met believed in me when I had nothing. Now I'm believing in you. You're going to be okay. It won't feel like it for a long time, but one day, I promise, you'll wake up and realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living, and that day will make all the hard ones worth it." The responses she received became some of her most treasured possessions. Letters from teenagers thanking her for the scholarship that meant they could attend college. Notes from younger children, written in crayon, saying the therapy sessions helped them stop having nightmares. Messages from foster parents who said the emergency funding allowed them to say yes to siblings who otherwise would have been separated. Each letter reminded Emma why the money mattered, not for what it could buy, but for what it could build. Hope, future, family. By the time Emma turned 12, the foundation had helped over 300 children. By 14, that number had grown to nearly 1,000. The work expanded. The foundation partnered with schools to create grief support programs. It funded a summer camp specifically for orphaned children, a place where kids could be around others who understood their loss without having to explain it. It established a network of emergency responders who could be called at any hour to help a child in crisis, ensuring no kid would spend Christmas Eve wondering where they'd sleep. Emma remained involved in every major decision, though Margaret and the board handled the day-to-day operations. On her 14th birthday, the foundation presented her with a photo album filled with pictures and stories of every child they'd helped. She spent hours poring over it, reading about lives that had been changed, futures that had been secured, hope that had been restored. "This is what Eleanor wanted," she told Patricia that night. both of them sitting on the porch swing watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness. Not just for me to have money, but for me to understand what it could do, what it should do. Patricia wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You've done something remarkable, Emma. You've taken a tragedy and transformed it into something that helps hundreds of people. Your parents would be so proud of you. Emma leaned into her. I think Eleanor would be too. I know she would. The town of Millbrook had changed as well, shaped by Emma's presence and generosity in ways both obvious and subtle. The foundation had funded renovations to the elementary school library, establishing a reading program in Sarah Henderson's name. It had contributed to the new community centre, ensuring there was a space where families could gather regardless of their ability to pay. It had provided scholarships to local students, helping kids from working-class families attend college without drowning in debt. But Emma's influence went beyond financial contributions. She'd become a symbol of resilience, a reminder that tragedy didn't have to destroy you. Adults spoke about her in hushed, reverent tones. Children saw her as proof that even the worst things could be survived. She didn't seek attention or praise, but she'd become impossible to ignore. When she walked down Main Street, people greeted her warmly. Shop owners knew her name. The librarian saved new books she thought Emma would enjoy. The woman at the diner still made her grilled cheese and tomato soup, never charging her, saying it was the least she could do for someone who'd given so much back to the community. Emma handled it all with quiet grace. She never flaunted her wealth. She dressed simply. She did her own homework. She had chores at home like any other kid. Patricia made sure of that, insisting that money couldn't shield Emma from the character-building work of being a responsible person. You're going to be an adult someday, Patricia would say when Emma complained about having to clean her room or do the dishes. And adults don't get to ignore responsibilities just because they're rich. You're learning to be a good person first and a wealthy person second. It was exactly what Emma needed. Grounding, normalcy. A reminder that her worth had nothing to do with her bank account and everything to do with who she chose to be. Christmas remained complicated. Every year, as December approached, Emma felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of memory pressing down. The anniversary of her parents' death fell on December 4th, and that day was always the hardest. She and Patricia had developed a tradition of visiting the cemetery together, bringing flowers, standing in silence while Emma talked to her parents about the year that had passed. But Christmas Eve had become something different, something sacred. It was the anniversary of the night Emma had entered the cottage, the night she'd discovered the basement, the night everything had changed. Each year on Christmas Eve, Emma would go down to the basement alone and light a candle. She'd sit in front of Eleanor's photographs and reflect on the year behind her and the year ahead. On her 16th Christmas Eve, Emma descended those familiar stone steps carrying a candle in a glass holder. She was taller now, no longer the tiny 9-year-old who'd first discovered this room. Her dark hair was longer, pulled back in a ponytail. She wore jeans and her father's old college sweatshirt, faded and worn, but still her favorite piece of clothing. She set the candle on Eleanor's desk and sat in the wooden chair, looking around at the photographs that had become as familiar as her own memories. 7 years had passed since that snowy night when she'd first opened the chest. 7 years of grief and growth, loss and learning, pain and purpose. The foundation had now helped over 3,000 children. 3,000 lives touched, futures changed, hope restored. Emma had graduated early from high school and been accepted to every college she'd applied to. She'd chosen to defer for a year, wanting to work full-time with the foundation before diving into university life. Patricia had supported the decision, understanding that Emma needed to build on Eleanor's legacy while the passion was still fresh and urgent. I've been thinking a lot about you lately, Emma said aloud to the photographs, to Eleanor's memory. About what your life must have been like. You spent 50 years alone in this cottage, carrying grief that never got lighter. 50 years is such a long time to hurt, but you didn't let it make you bitter. You didn't let it close your heart. Instead, you planned this incredible gift, not knowing who would receive it or when they'd need it. You just believed someone would. She picked up one of Eleanor's journals, one she'd read a dozen times but kept returning to. In it, Eleanor had written about the decision to leave everything to an unknown orphan. "I cannot save my Catherine," the entry read. "But perhaps I can save another mother's Catherine, another father's beloved child. Perhaps my pain can prevent someone else's. That is the only redemption I can find in all of this suffering." Emma closed the journal gently. "You did save someone," she whispered. "You saved me. Not just financially, though that was huge, but you showed me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story. That loss can become legacy, that the people we love never really leave us if we carry forward what they taught us." She stood and walked to the wall of photographs, stopping in front of the picture of young Catherine, the one that looked so much like Emma herself. She'd studied this photo countless times, always struck by the resemblance, by the strange sense of connection across generations. "I wish I could have known you," Emma said softly. "I wish you'd gotten to grow up, to have all the experiences you were denied. But in a weird way, I feel like I've gotten to know you through your mother's love, through the room she kept for you, through the gift she prepared in your memory. You mattered, Catherine. Your short life mattered so much that it's still changing the world decades after you left it." Upstairs, Emma heard Patricia moving around the kitchen, preparing their Christmas Eve dinner. In a few minutes, she'd be called up to help set the table. They'd eat together, just the two of them, the way they had for 7 years now. They'd exchange small, thoughtful gifts. They'd watch their favorite holiday movie. They'd maintain the traditions they'd built together, the family they'd created from loss and love and determination. But first, Emma pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. She'd gotten in the habit of writing an annual letter to Eleanor, a report of sorts on the year that had passed. She wrote about the Foundation's expansion into 3 new states, about the summer camp that had served 200 children this year, about the scholarship program that now sent 50 kids to college annually, all of them orphans who might not have had the opportunity otherwise. She wrote about her own life too, about getting her driver's license and Patricia's terror during the test, about being elected student body president her senior year, about her acceptance letters to college and her decision to defer, about the boyfriend she'd dated for 4 months before realizing they wanted different things from life, about the grief that still surprised her sometimes, hitting her out of nowhere when a song came on the radio or she smelled her mother's perfume on a stranger passing by. "I'm not the same girl who found your chest 7 years ago," Emma wrote. "That girl was so small, so broken, so terrified of everything. I'm still scared sometimes, still sad, still missing my parents with an ache that never fully goes away. But I'm also strong now, confident, certain of my purpose. You gave me that. You and Patricia and all the people who've helped me along the way. You gave me a future when I thought mine had ended. And now I'm spending my life trying to do the same for others." She signed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in the box with all the others. 7 letters now, 1 for each year. A chronicle of grief transformed into purpose, of a child growing into someone who understood that the greatest inheritance wasn't money, but the wisdom to use it well. Emma blew out the candle and climbed the stairs for the last time that evening. Tomorrow was Christmas. The Foundation had arranged for gift deliveries to every child in their network, over 3,000 packages sent with care and wrapped with hope. Emma had personally signed every card, her hand cramping after the first 1,000, but pushing through because she wanted each child to know someone cared enough to write their name. In the kitchen, Patricia had outdone herself. The table was set with Eleanor's good china, dishes that had sat in cabinets for decades before Emma and Patricia had decided to actually use them. A roasted chicken sat in the center, surrounded by vegetables and fresh bread. Candles flickered in holders that had belonged to Catherine, pressed into service after so many years of storage. "There she is," Patricia said warmly when Emma appeared. "I was about to send a search party to the basement." Emma smiled and wrapped her arms around Patricia in a tight hug. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For everything. For showing up that night 7 years ago, for staying, for becoming my family when I didn't think I'd ever have one again, for helping me figure out who I'm supposed to be." Patricia hugged her back fiercely. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to thank me for that. Being your family has been the greatest privilege of my life. Watching you grow from that broken little girl into this remarkable young woman, seeing what you've built, what you've become, it's been an honor." They pulled apart, both wiping tears, both laughing at themselves for getting emotional before they'd even eaten dinner. "Eleanor knew," Emma said suddenly. "When she planned all of this, when she left the cottage and the money and the letter, she knew the right person would come eventually. Someone who'd understand, someone who'd use it the way she hoped. And somehow, impossibly, that person was me." Patricia cupped Emma's face gently. "It wasn't impossible. It was fate. You were exactly who she was waiting for, and she was exactly what you needed." They sat down to dinner, talking and laughing, sharing stories about the year that had passed and making plans for the year ahead. Emma would turn 17 in March. She'd start college the following fall, studying non-profit management and social work. She wanted to learn how to run the foundation even more effectively, how to expand its reach, how to help even more children. But for tonight, she was simply a girl having Christmas Eve dinner with her family. The cottage was warm, filled with light and love, and the ghosts of everyone who'd ever lived within its walls. Outside, snow began to fall gently, dusting the windows with white. After dinner, they moved to the living room where the Christmas tree stood, decorated with ornaments both old and new. Some had belonged to Eleanor and Catherine, discovered in boxes in the attic and brought out with reverence. Others were ones Emma and Patricia had collected over the years, marking milestones and memories. Emma plugged in the lights and sat on the floor, just as she had that first Christmas Eve 7 years ago. Patricia settled onto the couch behind her, her hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if the accident hadn't happened?" Patricia asked softly. Emma considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think about graduating high school with my parents in the audience, about going to college while they worried and called too often, about bringing home a boyfriend someday and watching my dad try to intimidate him. All the normal things I'll never have." She paused, looking at the Christmas tree lights blurring through tears. "But then I think about the foundation, about the 3,000 kids who have families or homes or hope because of what Eleanor left me. And I can't wish away the accident without wishing away all of that too. Without wishing away you, this cottage, this life I've built. It feels wrong to choose between the life I lost and the life I have now." "You don't have to choose," Patricia said gently. "You can mourn what you lost while still being grateful for what you found. Both can be true at the same time." "I know," Emma whispered. "I just wish it didn't hurt so much to hold both." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the tree lights twinkle and the snow fall outside the window. Finally, Patricia spoke again. "Emma, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. I wanted to wait until you were older, until you were ready. I think maybe now is the time." Emma turned to look at her, curious. Patricia took a breath. "I'd like to adopt you, officially, legally. I know I'm already your guardian, and that won't change when you turn 18 because you'll be an adult. But I want you to be my daughter, really and truly, not just on paper as a ward, but as family, if you want that too." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You mean it?" "Of course I mean it. Emma, you've been my daughter in every way that matters for 7 years now. I just want to make it official. Want to give you my last name if you want it. Want to make sure the whole world knows you're mine and I'm yours." Emma threw herself into Patricia's arms, sobbing. Yes, I want that. I want it so much." They held each other for a long time, crying happy tears, the kind that wash clean instead of leaving scars. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling through the wetness on their faces. "Your parents will always be your parents," Patricia said firmly. "I'm not trying to replace them. But I love you, Emma. I've loved you since that first night when you were so small and so brave. And I want you to be my family officially." "You already are," Emma said. "You have been for years. but I'd be honored to be your daughter. Really, your daughter." That night, lying in bed in what had once been Catherine's room and was now completely Emma's, she stared at the ceiling and thought about the impossible journey that had brought her here. From that terrible December day when her parents died to this moment, lying safe in a home filled with love, preparing to officially become part of a new family while honoring the memory of the one she'd lost. Eleanor had written in one of her journals, "We cannot control what life takes from us, but we can control what we build from what remains." Emma had spent 7 years learning the truth of those words, learning that grief could coexist with joy, that loss could transform into legacy, that the worst moment of your life didn't have to define all the moments that followed. She thought about the little girl she'd been, orphaned and terrified, stumbling into this cottage with nothing but a stuffed rabbit and a heart full of pain. She thought about finding the basement, opening the chest, reading Eleanor's letter. She thought about every decision she'd made since then, every child the foundation had helped, every life that had been changed. And she understood, finally and completely, that Eleanor's gift hadn't just been money. It had been permission. Permission to survive, permission to thrive, permission to build a life worthy of everyone who'd been lost along the way. Anyone can be broken by tragedy if they let it consume them, but Emma had chosen differently. She'd chosen to honor her pain by transforming it into purpose, to remember her parents by helping other orphaned children find hope, to carry forward Eleanor's legacy by proving that love doesn't die when people do, it simply changes form and finds new ways to heal the world. As Emma drifted off to sleep, warm and safe in the cottage that had become her sanctuary, she whispered one final thank you into the darkness. To her parents, for loving her enough to teach her how to love others. To Patricia, for showing her that family isn't just blood, but choice and commitment. To Eleanor, for believing that somewhere out there, decades in the future, a child would come who needed exactly what she had to give. And to Catherine, whose short life had mattered so much that it was still changing the world more than 60 years after she'd left it. The cottage settled into silence around her, its stones holding the memories of everyone who'd ever called it home. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, blanketing the world in quiet white. And inside, in a bedroom that had waited 70 years for the right child, Emma slept peacefully, surrounded by love both past and present, dreaming of the future she would build on the foundation of loss transformed into hope. Because for Emma, for Patricia, for every child the foundation would help, and for Eleanor's memory that would live on in all of them, this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A reminder that even in our darkest moments, even when everything is lost, there is still light waiting to be found. Still hope waiting to be claimed. Still love waiting to guide us home. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Click to keep discovering with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that love never truly dies. It just finds new ways to change the world.